Katie Miller stepped off the transport shuttle and felt her stomach drop as she saw Nexus Prime Station for the first time. The massive structure stretched out in all directions like a metal city floating in space. Lights blinked everywhere, and ships of all shapes and sizes docked at hundreds of different ports. She had seen pictures during her training on Earth, but nothing could have prepared her for how huge it really was. "Stay close to the group," Ambassador Jake Peterson said as he walked up beside her. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray hair and kind eyes. "Remember that we are representing all of humanity here. Every move we make matters." Katie nodded and adjusted the strap of her small bag. At 19, she was the youngest member of the Human Cultural Exchange Program. She had grown up on a cattle ranch in Montana where the nearest neighbor lived 20 miles away. The idea that millions of alien beings lived and worked in this one station made her head spin. The docking bay was filled with creatures she had only seen in training videos. Tall crystal beings that looked like living diamonds walked past them without a glance. Their skin caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns. These were the Veltar, and they were supposed to be the most advanced race in the galaxy. At least that's what they told everyone, a group of insect-like aliens scuttled by carrying boxes of trade goods. Their 6 legs moved in perfect rhythm, and their compound eyes tracked every movement around them. Katie knew these were the Zicht H traders. They controlled most of the commerce between worlds and were always busy making deals. "Amazing, isn't it?" Jake said as he watched Katie's face. 3 months ago, no human had ever seen any of this. Now here we are as official members of the Galactic Federation. "Provisional members," corrected Dr. Lisa Park, who was the team's xenobiologist. She was a small woman with short black hair who always seemed worried about something. "We still have to prove we belong here." Katie had read all the files during the long trip from Earth. Humanity had been discovered by accident when a Veltar science ship detected radio signals from their solar system. First contact had been peaceful but confusing. Earth was immediately classified as a Class 12 Deathworld after the aliens learned about things like hurricanes, earthquakes, and predators that could kill you. Most aliens came from what humans would consider garden worlds, perfect weather all the time, no dangerous animals, stable geology that never surprised anyone. The idea that intelligent life could evolve on a world where the environment actively tried to kill you was both fascinating and terrifying to them. "Welcome to Nexus Prime," a voice said behind them. They turned to see a Veltar approaching. Its crystal body was pale blue, and it moved with the smooth, gliding motion typical of its species. "I am Coordinator Velanash. I will be overseeing your orientation and ensuring your safety during your stay." The way it said safety made Katie feel like a child being introduced to a busy street. Jake stepped forward and extended his hand for a handshake, but Velanash just stared at it for a moment before backing away slightly. "Physical contact between species is discouraged," Velanash explained in a tone that suggested Jake should have known better. "Your species has a reputation for aggressive behavior, and we must take precautions." Katie saw Jake's jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm. "Of course. We appreciate your hospitality and look forward to learning about your cultures." Velanash led them through a series of corridors that were clearly built for beings much taller than humans. Katie had to look up to see the ceiling, and the doorways were wide enough for 3 people to walk through side by side. Everything was made of the same smooth metal that seemed to glow with its own inner light. The station houses over 12 million beings from 147 different species, Velanash explained as they walked. Most areas are kept at standard galactic atmosphere and gravity, which should be comfortable for your kind, though perhaps a bit light. Your homeworld's crushing gravitational field is well documented. Katie almost laughed at that. Earth's gravity was crushing? She had grown up throwing hay bales that weighed more than some of these aliens probably did. But she kept her mouth shut and continued listening. "You will notice that other species may seem nervous around humans," Velanash continued. "This is natural. Your species comes from what we call a murder world. The fact that you survived to develop space travel is remarkable, but it has left you with certain traits that others find disturbing. What kind of traits? Dr. Park asked. Your reaction speed for one thing. Deathworld species must respond to threats faster than is normal. This makes your movements seem aggressive even when you mean no harm. Also, your physical strength is considerable compared to most civilized species. They entered a large central area filled with beings from dozens of different worlds. Katie saw creatures that looked like walking trees, others that seemed to be made of liquid metal, and some that were just clouds of colored gas in mechanical suits. The noise was incredible, with hundreds of different languages being spoken at once. Most of them noticed the human group immediately. Conversations stopped as alien eyes tracked their movement across the space. Some moved out of their path entirely while others clustered together and spoke in whispers. Katie felt like an animal in a zoo. As you can see, your reputation precedes you, Velanash said with what might have been amusement. Many of these beings have never seen a Deathworld species in person. You are objects of great curiosity. A small group of aquatic aliens in environmental suits approached them. Their leader spoke through a translation device that made its voice sound like bubbles popping. Are these the new humans? It asked Velanash. They seem so small and fragile. How did creatures like this survive on such a terrible world? Appearances can be deceiving, Velanash replied. These beings are far from fragile despite their size. Their species has survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and countless predators that would terrify most civilized races. Katie wanted to point out that most humans actually liked their planet and didn't consider it terrible at all, but she sensed this wasn't the time. She was starting to understand that these aliens saw Earth as some kind of nightmare world and humans as tragic survivors rather than a successful species. Your quarters have been prepared in the diplomatic section, Velanash said as they continued walking. Tomorrow we will begin your formal orientation with the other exchange students. I trust you will find the experience educational. As they walked toward their new temporary home, Katie wondered what she had gotten herself into. These beings seemed to think humans were dangerous savages from a world of constant death. She looked around at the peaceful station with its gentle lighting and quiet atmosphere and realized that maybe they were right to be nervous. This place felt more like a museum than somewhere people actually lived. Back home on the ranch even. A quiet day could turn deadly if you weren't careful. Here it seemed like nothing dangerous ever happened at all. Katie woke up in her quarters feeling like she had slept on a cloud. The bed was so soft, she kept sinking into it all night, and the room temperature never changed even a little bit. Back home in Montana, the temperature could drop 30 degrees overnight, and she liked it that way. The constant perfect conditions here made her feel restless. She met the other humans for breakfast in a dining area designed for their species. The food looked familiar, but tasted bland, like someone had forgotten to add seasoning. Jake Peterson sat across from her picking at something that was supposed to be eggs. How did you sleep? He asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Too comfortable, Katie replied. It's like living inside a pillow. Don't these people ever deal with anything challenging? Dr. Park looked up from her notes where she was writing observations about their first day. That's exactly the point, Katie. Most species evolved on worlds where challenge and danger were rare. They've spent thousands of years creating perfect environments where nothing unexpected ever happens. That sounds boring, Katie said, and immediately felt bad for being negative. These aliens were being kind to them even if they didn't understand humans very well. Velanash appeared in the doorway, moving with that smooth gliding motion all his species used. Good morning, humans. I trust you found your accommodation satisfactory. Today we begin your orientation with the other exchange students. Please follow me. They walked through more of those oversized corridors until they reached a large room filled with young beings from different species. Katie counted at least 20 different types of aliens, all sitting in groups based on what world they came from. The humans were clearly the main attraction as every eye in the room turned to watch them enter. Please take seats anywhere you feel comfortable, Velenash announced. Today we will tour the recreational facilities so you can see how different species relax and socialize. Katie sat down next to a being that looked like a walking flower. Its petals were bright yellow and it smelled like honey. When she smiled and said hello, it actually flinched backward like she had threatened it. I am sorry, the flower being said through a translator. Your species has such intense facial expressions. When you show your teeth like that, it appears very threatening. Katie tried to explain that smiling was a sign of friendship among humans, but the flower being continued to lean away from her. She noticed that most of the other students were doing the same thing. They wanted to look at the humans, but they also seemed afraid to get too close. The first stop on their tour was something called the Excitement Center, which turned out to be the least exciting place Katie had ever seen. The activities included floating in low-gravity pools, looking at slowly changing light patterns, and listening to what the aliens called thrilling audio experiences that sounded like elevator music. This is our most popular extreme sport, explained their guide, who was a tall, thin being with gray skin and 4 arms. It gestured to a group of aliens who were slowly bouncing on what looked like trampolines, except they were only going up about 2 feet in the air. Extreme sport? Katie asked, trying to keep the disbelief out of her voice. Oh yes, very dangerous, the guide said seriously. Some participants have reported elevated heart rates and mild dizziness. We have medical teams standing by at all times. Katie watched the bouncing aliens for a few minutes. Back home, her little brother could jump higher than that just playing around in the backyard. She wondered what these beings would think of actual human sports like football or rock climbing. Would you like to try? The guide asked hopefully. Maybe later, Katie said, not wanting to hurt anyone's feelings. The next area was filled with beings experiencing what they called sensory adventures. These turned out to be mild temperature changes, gentle breezes, and soft textures that the aliens touched very carefully like they might be dangerous. One of the exchange students, a blue, lizard-like creature, approached Katie while she was watching the sensory experiences. Is it true that your homeworld has weather that changes by itself? It asked in a whisper. Yes, Katie replied. Sometimes it rains or snows or gets windy. The lizard being's eyes went wide. And you go outside when this happens? Of course. We work outside every day no matter what the weather is like. That seems terrifying. What if the weather hurts you? Katie thought about how to explain this. Well, sometimes it's uncomfortable, but we dress appropriately and we've learned how to work with different conditions. Actually, a lot of humans really enjoy weather changes. It keeps things interesting. Interesting. The lizard being repeated like it was a foreign concept. During lunch, Katie learned more about how the other species viewed Earth and humans. According to them, Earth was a nightmare world where the ground could shake without warning. Water fell from the sky with no control, and the temperature changed constantly. They were amazed that any intelligent life had survived there at all. Your species must be incredibly strong to live in such conditions, said a gas being whose translator made it sound like wind chimes. The gravity alone would crush most civilized races. We don't think of ourselves as particularly strong, Katie replied. Earth's gravity is just normal for us? Normal, several aliens said, at the same time like she had said something impossible. What? About the predators, asked a small furry creature that reminded Katie of a hamster. We have read reports of creatures on your world that hunt and eat other animals. How do you survive with such monsters nearby? Katie almost laughed. Most of Earth's predators won't bother humans if we leave them alone. We've learned to coexist with them. Coexist with creatures that could kill you, the hamster being squeaked. They're just animals trying to survive like everything else. We respect them and they mostly respect us. The afternoon brought more tours of what the aliens considered recreational activities. There was an area for gentle mental stimulation that turned out to be puzzles so simple a human child could solve them in seconds. Another section featured physical activities that involved very slow walking on perfectly flat surfaces. Katie began to understand why the aliens were so nervous around humans. These beings had spent thousands of years removing every possible source of danger or discomfort from their lives. The idea of a species that had evolved alongside constant challenges was completely outside their experience. As the day ended and they returned to their quarters, Katie felt a strange mix of pity and frustration. These aliens had created perfect safe worlds for themselves, but in doing so, they had also made themselves weak and fearful. They saw humans as savage survivors from a death world when really humans were just a species that had learned to adapt and thrive no matter what life threw at them. She wondered what would happen when the aliens realized that what they called survival skills were just normal everyday abilities for any human. The thought made her both excited and worried about what the rest of their stay would bring. The diplomatic reception was the biggest event Katie had seen since arriving at HFY. The main hall had been decorated with floating lights that changed colors and soft music played from hidden speakers. Beings from dozens of different worlds moved around in small groups, talking quietly and sipping drinks that sparkled in their glasses. Katie wore the formal dress uniform that had been made for the human delegation. It felt strange after days of casual clothes, but she had to admit it looked professional. Jake Peterson stood near the center of the room talking with a group of Veltar diplomats while Dr. Park was busy taking notes about the different social behaviors. She observed. "Remember to stay calm and polite no matter what happens," Jake had told them before the reception started. "Some species might test us to see how we react. This is our chance to show that humans can be trusted in civilized society." Katie had been looking forward to the event. After days of being treated like dangerous curiosities, she hoped this formal setting might help her connect with some of the other species on a more equal level. She was wrong. Most of the aliens still kept their distance from the humans. They would look over at them and whisper to each other, but few approached directly. Katie understood their nervousness, but it was getting frustrating to be treated like a wild animal that might attack at any moment. She decided to get something to drink from the refreshment table at one side of the hall. The selection included beverages from many different worlds, though most looked like colored water with no real flavor. She was reaching for a glass when she noticed a group of new arrivals entering the hall. These aliens were different from the others she had met. They stood taller and moved with aggressive confidence instead of the careful politeness she had grown used to. Their skin looked like dark leather covered in natural armor plates, and their eyes were bright yellow with narrow pupils. Katie recognized them from her briefing materials as Kethmori. The Kethmori were one of the few warrior species in the galaxy. Unlike most civilized races, they had evolved on a world with actual conflict and competition. They controlled several star systems through military strength and were known for believing that physical power determined worth. Most other species were afraid of them. Their leader was obviously a military officer based on the symbols carved into his armor. He was massive even by Kethmori standards and carried himself like someone used to being obeyed without question. The way he looked around the room reminded Katie of a predator selecting prey. "That's Commander Thekver," Dr. Park said quietly as she joined Katie at the refreshment table. "He's in charge of Kethmori security for this sector. I heard he specifically requested to attend tonight so he could meet the humans." Katie watched as Thekver moved through the crowd. Other aliens quickly moved out of his way and avoided making eye contact. Even the proud Veltar seemed nervous around him. He was drinking something from a large metal container that he emptied and refilled several times. "He's getting drunk," Katie observed. "That's not good," Dr. Park replied. "Kethmori become more aggressive when they drink. Maybe we should stay away from that side of the room." But Thekver had already noticed them. His yellow eyes focused on Katie with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She could see him studying her like he was trying to figure out if she was a threat or an opportunity. The way he looked at her reminded her of bulls back home when they were deciding whether to charge. Jake Peterson was still across the room talking with the Veltar delegation. Katie could see him glancing over at the Kethmori group with concern, but he was too far away to intervene quickly if something happened. The other humans were scattered around the hall trying to make Diplomatic connections. Vector started walking toward the refreshment area where Katie and Dr. Park were standing. His movements were still controlled, but Katie could tell the alcohol was affecting his judgment. Other aliens noticed where he was going and began moving away from that part of the room. "Maybe we should leave," Dr. Park whispered. "We can't run away every time someone looks at us wrong," Katie replied, though she was starting to feel uneasy herself. "We're supposed to be proving that humans can handle these situations." Vector reached the refreshment table and planted himself directly in front of Katie, blocking her path back to the main part of the hall. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His armor plating was scarred from old battles, and his breath smelled like whatever strong drink he had been consuming. "So you are one of the famous Deathworld humans," he said in a voice like grinding metal. "You seem very small for a creature from such a terrible place." "Earth isn't terrible," Katie replied, keeping her voice calm and polite. "It's actually quite beautiful once you learn to appreciate it." Vector laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Beautiful? Yes, I've heard how you humans try to pretend your murder world is something to be proud of. But we Kethmori know the truth about strength and weakness." Dr. Park tugged on Katie's sleeve, trying to get her to move away from the confrontation, but there wasn't anywhere to go. Vector had positioned himself so that the only way out was past him. "Your species hides behind the reputation of your dangerous world," Vector continued, his voice getting louder. "But look at you, tiny and weak like all the other civilized races. You survived your planet through luck, not strength." Other beings in the hall had stopped their conversations to watch what was happening. Katie could see Jake Peterson pushing through the crowd trying to reach them, but he was still too far away. Security officers were also moving in their direction, but they seemed uncertain about how to handle a situation involving both humans and Kethmori. "I don't want any trouble," Katie said firmly. "Please let us pass." "Trouble," Vector repeated mockingly. "The Deathworld human is afraid of a little conversation. How disappointing." He took another drink from his container and stepped closer. To Katie, she could smell the alcohol on his breath and see the anger building in his yellow eyes. Whatever he was drinking had clearly affected his judgment, and Katie realized this situation was about to get much worse. "You know what I think?" Vector said, leaning down so his face was level with Katie's. "I think humans are just another weak species that got lucky. I think you have been lying about your strength to scare the other races." "We're not lying about anything," Katie replied, but she could feel her own anger starting to build. Back home, she had dealt with plenty of drunk troublemakers, and they all acted the same way regardless of species. "Prove it," Vector snarled. And without warning, his armored hand shot out and grabbed Katie's arm with crushing force. The pain shot through Katie's arm like lightning as Vector's armored grip tightened around her wrist. His fingers were designed to crush through metal, and he was putting real force behind the squeeze. She could feel the bones in her arm starting to compress under the pressure and knew that in a few seconds something would break. Back home on the ranch, Katie had been grabbed by angry bulls, stepped on by horses, and caught in farm machinery. Her father had taught her from childhood that when something grabs you, the first rule is simple. Don't think about it. Don't hesitate. React immediately or you might not get another chance. The response was completely automatic. Katie's left hand came up and grabbed Vector's wrist while her body twisted counterclockwise to relieve the pressure on her trapped arm. At the same time, her right elbow drove upward into the inside of his elbow joint. The leverage was perfect, and the angle was exactly what her father had drilled into her 1,000 times. The sound was like a dry branch snapping in half. Vector's elbow joint bent backward in a direction it was never meant to go. His grip on Katie's arm vanished instantly as his nervous system registered the damage and sent shock waves of pain through his entire body. The whole thing took less than half a second. One moment, Vector was standing over Katie trying to intimidate her with his superior size and strength. The next moment he was on his knees, howling in agony while his broken arm hung at an impossible angle. The entire hall went silent. Hundreds of alien beings stopped their conversations and stared at the scene in complete shock. Most of them had never seen violence of any kind, let alone witnessed a small human female Disable a heavily armored Kethmori warrior in the blink of an eye. Katie looked down at Dekver, who was still screaming and clutching his ruined arm. Her first instinct after neutralizing the threat was to help the injured person. It didn't matter that he had attacked her. Someone was hurt and needed medical attention. "Don't move your arm," she said, kneeling beside him. "You've got a compound fracture of the elbow. If you move it wrong, you could damage the nerves permanently." Dekver stared at her through eyes wide with pain and confusion. He was trying to process what had just happened, but his brain couldn't make sense of it. How had this tiny human moved so fast? Where had that incredible leverage come from? How did she know so much about treating injuries? "Someone call medical," Katie shouted to the crowd of stunned aliens. "He needs immediate attention for the bone damage, and he's probably going into shock." Dr. Park was the first to recover from the surprise. She pushed through the circle of onlookers and dropped down beside Katie. "What do you need me to do?" "Help me stabilize his arm before the medics get here. We need to keep it from moving and cutting off circulation." The two humans worked together with practiced efficiency. Katie held Dekver's arm in position while Dr. Park used napkins from the refreshment table to create a makeshift splint. Their movements were quick and confident, like they had dealt with this kind of injury many times before. Jake Peterson finally reached them along with several security officers who looked completely lost. They had protocols for dealing with diplomatic incidents, but nothing in their training covered what to do when the victim of an attack immediately started providing medical aid to their attacker. "What happened?" Jake asked, though he could see the obvious answer. "He grabbed my arm," Katie replied without looking up from her work on Dekver's injury. "Basic self-defense. Nothing more than any human would do in the same situation." "Any human," one of the security officers repeated in amazement. The medical team arrived with equipment that looked far more advanced than anything on Earth. They took over from Katie and Dr. Park, but kept asking them questions about human first aid techniques. Apparently, their quick thinking had prevented additional damage that could have permanently crippled Dekver. As the medics worked other Kethmori officers pushed through the crowd to see what had happened to their commander. They were expecting to find him standing over a defeated human. Instead, they found him being carefully loaded onto a medical transport while a small human female gave detailed instructions about treating his injury. "How?" one of the Kethmori officers asked Katie. "How did you move that fast?" "I didn't move fast," Katie replied, confused by the question. "That was normal reaction time for a human." The aliens looked at each other in disbelief. Normal reaction time? They had watched the security footage being recorded by the station's systems. Katie had identified the threat, formulated a response, and executed a perfect defensive technique. In less time than most species needed just to realize they were in danger. "The leverage," another Kethmori said, studying Katie like she was some kind of machine. "How did you know exactly where to apply force to break his joint?" "My dad taught me basic self-defense when I was little," Katie explained. "Every human learns this stuff. You have to when you live on a world where things can go wrong quickly." Jake Peterson was frantically trying to do damage control. "This was clearly self-defense," he announced to anyone who would listen. Commander Dekver initiated physical contact, and Ms. Miller responded appropriately to protect herself. But the other aliens weren't focused on who was at fault. They were trying to understand what they had just witnessed. The speed, the precision, the immediate shift from defensive violence to medical care. It was unlike anything they had ever seen from a civilized species. Velanash appeared at Jake's side, looking like his crystal structure might shatter from stress. "Ambassador Peterson, this incident will need to be reported to the Federation Council. Immediately, there will be an investigation." "Of course," Jake replied. "Katie will cooperate fully with any investigation." Dekver was conscious but heavily medicated as they prepared to transport him to the medical bay. He looked at Katie with something that might have been respect mixed with fear. "Deathworld girl," he said in a voice slurred by pain medication. "I underestimated your kind." As the medical team carried him away, Katie realized that everyone in the hall was still staring at her. The looks of fear and curiosity were even more intense than before. Word of what had happened was already spreading through the stations. Communication systems. Within an hour, every being on Nexus Prime would know that the small human female had disabled a Kethmori warrior in less than a second. The implications of that fact were about to change everything about how the galaxy viewed humanity. Katie just hoped she hadn't ruined humanity's chances of joining the galactic community. She had only done what any human would do when grabbed by something trying to hurt them. But apparently that simple fact was more terrifying to the other species than anything they had imagined about life on a Deathworld. Katie woke up the next morning to find that she had become the most famous human in the galaxy. The footage from the diplomatic reception had been transmitted across every communication network and viewed by billions of beings on hundreds of worlds. Most had never seen actual violence before, and watching a small human female disable a trained warrior in less than a second had left them stunned. Jake Peterson was waiting for her in the dining area with a stack of communication devices, all flashing with incoming messages. His expression was a mixture of pride and worry that reminded Katie of her father when she had won her first rodeo competition but also gotten thrown by a particularly mean horse. "The Federation Council wants to speak with you this afternoon," he said as she sat down with her breakfast. 3 different news organizations want interviews, and the Kethmori delegation has formally requested a meeting. "Am I in trouble?" Katie asked, though she already knew the answer from Jake's face. "Not trouble exactly," Dr. Park said, joining them at the table. "But you've created quite a stir. The xenobiologists are scrambling to revise their entire understanding of human capabilities." Katie sipped her coffee and tried to process the situation. "I just defended myself. Any human would have done the same thing." "That's exactly what has everyone so concerned," Jake replied. "You keep saying any human could do what you did, but the other species find that impossible to believe." The first visitor of the day was Velanash, who arrived looking even more stressed than usual. His crystal body had taken on a gray tint that Katie had learned meant he was deeply worried about something. "Miss Miller," he said in his formal tone, "the station administrators need to understand exactly what happened last night. Could you please demonstrate the technique you used on Commander Thekver?" Katie looked at Jake, who nodded his approval. They had discussed this request and decided that cooperation was better than secrecy. She stood up and gestured for Velanash to extend his arm. "I can't actually do it because I don't want to hurt you," she explained. "But the basic principle is simple leverage physics. When someone grabs your arm, you use their grip against them by applying rotational force to their weakest joint." She guided Velanash through the motions in slow motion, showing him exactly where she had applied pressure and how the leverage had worked. To Katie, it was elementary self-defense that every farm kid learned by age 10. To Velanash, it was a revelation about human physical capabilities. "The speed," he said wonderingly. "How long did it take you to decide on this response?" Katie thought about it. "I didn't really decide anything. When something grabs you on a dangerous world, you react immediately or you might not survive. It's automatic." "Automatic," Velanash repeated like he was learning a new word. The meeting with the Federation Council took place in a large chamber filled with representatives from dozens of different species. Katie sat at a small table in the center while hundreds of alien eyes studied her every movement. She felt like a specimen in a laboratory. The questions came from all directions. How fast could humans move when threatened? What other combat techniques did they know? How many humans possessed these abilities? Katie answered honestly, but she could see that her responses were making the council members increasingly nervous. "You claim that all humans learn these defensive techniques," said a Veltar counselor. "Surely you mean only your military forces." "No, sir," Katie replied. "Basic self-defense is taught to children as soon as they are old enough to understand it. Living on Earth means you might face dangerous situations at any time. Even your younglings possess these capabilities," asked a small furry delegate whose translator made him sound terrified. Well, they're not as strong or fast as adults, but yes, they learn the basics early. It's just part of growing up safely. The council chamber erupted in whispered conversations as the delegates tried to process this information. The idea that an entire species of beings with superhuman reflexes and combat training was both fascinating and frightening to creatures who had never faced real physical threats. Commander Thekver arrived for his meeting with the humans later that afternoon. His arm was in a complex mechanical brace that would help the bones heal properly, and his yellow eyes held a new respect when he looked at Katie. "I owe you an apology and a debt," he said formally. "I attacked you without provocation, and you responded with exactly the right amount of force to stop me without causing permanent damage." Katie was surprised by his changed attitude. "You don't owe me anything. I'm just glad you're going to recover fully. The medical staff told me that your immediate first aid probably saved my arm from permanent nerve damage," Thekver continued. "Where I come from, warriors respect skill and honor. You have both." The conversation that followed changed Katie's understanding of why the incident had caused such a stir. According to Thekver, most species in the galaxy fell into two categories. They were either completely peaceful with no fighting ability at all, or they were aggressive warriors who used violence as their first response to any conflict. Humans were something new. They had incredible combat capabilities but used them only when necessary and always followed up with compassion and aid. They could switch instantly from deadly defenders to skilled healers. This combination was unprecedented in galactic history. "The Kethmori Empire would like to propose a training exchange," Thekver said, surprising everyone. "Our warriors could learn much from your defensive techniques and medical knowledge." Within days, other species were making similar requests. The peaceful races wanted to learn basic self-defense to protect themselves from the few aggressive species in the galaxy. The warrior races wanted to understand human tactics that emphasized protection over conquest. Katie found herself teaching classes to mixed groups of aliens who were amazed by techniques that seemed simple to her. A basic wrist grab escaped that. She had learned at age 8 required weeks of practice for most other species to master. The news coverage continued for months. Katie became known throughout the galaxy as the human who had redefined what it meant to be strong. Stories about Earth changed from descriptions of a terrible Deathworld to accounts of a place that produced beings of incredible capability and wisdom. Ambassador Peterson used the attention to renegotiate humanity's status in the Federation. The provisional membership became full membership, with humans being invited to join peacekeeping forces and security councils. Earth was no longer seen as a curiosity but as a valuable ally. Katie received a message from her family back on the ranch asking how she was enjoying her time among the peaceful aliens of the galaxy. She laughed at the irony as she watched a group of Kethmori warriors practicing the gentle restraint techniques she had taught them. The station's crime rate had dropped to almost zero since word spread that humans were present and willing to help maintain order. Most potential troublemakers decided that testing their luck against beings from a Deathworld wasn't worth the risk. As Katie prepared for her return to Earth, she reflected on how much had changed since her arrival. The aliens no longer saw humans as savage survivors or fragile curiosities. They understood now that Earth had produced something rare in the galaxy, a species that was both incredibly capable and deeply compassionate. Beings who could fight when necessary but preferred to heal and protect. The last entry in her journal before leaving HFY simply read, "Sometimes the best way to make peace is to be prepared for war." Earth had taught humanity that lesson well, and now the galaxy was learning it too.